Well, thank you, Michelle. She'll be back in a minute. Now, okay, so that's Michelle's experience. What am I doing here? Well, give you a little bit of background. I spent my professional life working for NBC News. Half my life I spent with them. Places like this, Gaza. And of course, not just Gaza, but here in Baghdad, a place that reminds you that good health can never be taken for granted. More than a dozen wars and 5 revolutions and more suicide bombings than I can count have left me with more visions of death than anyone could wish for, and that affects your priorities as well as your perspective. And one lesson, of course, is that none of us is immune from disease. Good health can never be taken for granted. And my personal reminder of that came in 1994 with news of my father, John. He was suffering from Huntington's disease, a disease I'd never heard of, and like most people, of course. It was, I was told at that time, incurable, untreatable, and more than that, genetic. I had a 50-50 chance of having the faulty gene that caused the disease. I spent my working life immersed in the misery that nature as well as men can bring upon the human race, but it never occurred to me that my family could be a victim. My father was a career soldier with extraordinary humanity, and that was that humanity that inspired my mother to nurse him personally until he died. You might think that dying with a tube down your throat acting for your stomach would be the worst thing imaginable. No, it's not. Far worse is the loss of dignity that comes for a once proud man to see his family wince as his body and mind become twisted until unrecognizable. But worse still than that is the knowledge that you could pass that nightmare on to his sons. My brother John is 5 years older than me. He graduated from Oxford with a law degree, a first. Now, before meeting his neurologist, John has to practice walking in a straight line because he knows that she will ask him to do it, and it's very difficult for him. Like all of us with this disease in our lives, John's very afraid of the terrible, inexorable fate that it imparts. I also have learned to recognize fear. I've seen it more times than I wished on the faces of people who are going to die, and I felt it myself. In March 1996, in the last days of the war in Yugoslavia, I was captured in the so-called Doughboy Pocket in the middle of that map there with a camera crew by a renegade platoon of Mujahideen guerrillas. And at one point during that time, the young fighter who had held an AK-47 to my chest for the last 5 hours held a grenade to my head while he closed his eyes and prayed to Allah. Now, that is an experience of real fear. But not that moment, nor any other I had experienced in my work, instilled more fear, dread, and terror as Huntington's disease when I first encountered it. And 6 years ago, I decided to take the test that would determine whether I had that defective gene. The reason that I did was really that I was approaching that time in my life, I think, when most men have to make some serious considerations about where their life is going. All the normal things to do with your career, children, relationships, those sorts of things. And I felt that I needed this test to empower those decisions. And I discovered that the disease that took my father and is inflicting the same terrible decline on my brother will take me too. So 6 years on, my life has changed. I have swapped wars for the battle to end the stigma and shame that surrounds this disease. And in the course of that, I've met an awful lot of people around the world, and I have some lessons to change my view of the disease. I'm still, no question about it, constantly aware of my situation. No question. Not an hour goes by when I don't picture how my quality of life will drain away. fear that however much my friends might always promise that they're going to come and see me, that they won't really want to when I get sick, just like I didn't want to go and see my father when he lost the ability to converse with me. And will I be able to dance with my baby daughter on her 16th birthday? That time bomb is real, present, and desperate for all of us who know we have this disease, and every day hundreds of men, women, and children around the world slip into the cauldron of despair, which is that point where there's no longer the hope that research might not bear fruit in time for them. But this can change. 25 years of watching men kill each other has taught me another truth about them, and that is that human beings lose their social equilibrium, their moral compass, if you like, when you take two things away from them: dignity and hope. Now, I think we've already shown the vacuum of dignity that those people like my father suffering and Michelle's father from HD feel, but what about hope? Do we have that? Well, as I think you will hear today from Bernhard perhaps and others, there are several clinical trials coming in the next 2 to 3 years that could really show real promise. And everyone who is from an HD family needs to know about them. Never underestimate, if you're dealing with HD families, what the current research means to the families around the world and all of them around them as we scour the newspapers and internet for any fragment of news from the laboratories that you're going to hear about. In a world of total darkness, the very faintest glimmer of light emboldens the human spirit to go on. In the immediate invasion of Iraq in 2003, when the vacuum of order there was filled with terrible atrocities, I went to find out what had happened to the country's only asylum. I discovered that after looting had started there, many of the staff, in fact all of the staff, had fled, leaving the looters to rape some of the female inmates. Only one nurse stayed, disguised in an inmate's gown, risking all to look after her patients. She was paid nothing but the love and the gratitude of those people who knew that without her they would not have survived. Now, when I left that fly and disease-infested bedlam, my first reaction was to think that the words God-forsaken could never have been more apt. But then I realized that on reflection, someone's God could not have been more manifest than in the simple love and goodness that that nurse showed. You see, it's in the darkest moments that the greatest qualities of the human spirit shine brightest. And in doing so, they give us all hope. It's in the nature of human beings to care for the infirm and to strive to make them better. If the Nazis had won the war, I wouldn't be standing here now, because they advocated mandatory euthanasia for those people with my disease. This 1938 poster, a splendid piece of propaganda for the Nazi compulsory euthanasia program, which George mentioned earlier, shows a doctor with a man with Huntington's and the words, "This person suffering," I translate, by the way, "this person suffering from hereditary defects cost the community 60,000 Reichsmark during his lifetime. Fellow Germans, that is your money too." But this eugenic interpretation of Darwin's theories would have depressed the old boy greatly, because he was very clear on this issue. The balance of dependency, he said, is part of our social access, allowing the growth of the instinct of sympathy, which he called the noblest part of our nature. He would have been very proud of Michelle and George and all the others who are caring for people with HD. Huntington's, you see, has had the almost unique power to challenge the human spirit because of the ways in which it has in the past sucked hope into a vortex. But it's not defeated that human spirit because the very best of humanity surrounds it. And it's that is why I'm standing here now. The superhuman patience and tirelessness of the families and other carers. But there's more than even that to give me reason not to fear this disease as much as I did 6 years ago. I believe that right now we have the opportunity to enter a new collaboration between all the players in this saga. The pharmaceutical companies, the governments, the health organizations, the researchers, but most of all, the families. And if we can work together in the process of finding treatments to manage the disease, it's within our power to change what is perceived, or has been till now, as unchangeable, because the human race is capable of anything. In 1991, after the Gulf War that did not remove Saddam, I went to the Iranian border with Iraq after rumors that Kurdish refugees were spilling across it. What we found was a sea of humanity pouring over the mountains. 1 million people, almost all of them women and children, running from Saddam's chemical attacks in the north of Iraq. It was winter, it was bitterly cold, but the image imprinted on my mind till the day I die was one particular girl of about 12. She was clambering over those rocks, focused on survival, her face dripping with freezing mud. On her back, her younger sister, 2 or so years old, unconscious, barely alive. She had carried that child almost 90 miles. All humans, you see, are capable of far more than you can ever believe. If we engage ourselves now, we really are on the brink of being able to give the millions of HD sufferers and carers who have till now made up a lost community dignity and hope. Thank you.